So as always, we'll start with a brief intro, and then we'll hand over to Belinda to do the session, which is really looking forward to. So Platform Finance User Group. So we've launched online this year. So it's a community for finance and IT professionals to look at how to leverage the Power Platform. So we've got a mix of people on the call, in the sessions, and really looking at how the applications of the Power Platform work within the finance sector. So Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, and maybe Power Virtual Agents. And also say I want to put some stuff in here around dynamics and things like that as well, because it's all integrated. It's all thinking about the bigger picture with this. I think finance is one of the key areas for Power Platform, and hopefully a lot of you kind of agree being on this call. So just a little introduction to myself. So I'm Rishi Supra. I'm a data platform MVP, work at Altius along with Chris. I am a chartered accountant by background. Don't do much accounting these days, but worked in some finance roles and got more and more into tech. Chris is also. Do you want to introduce yourself quickly, Chris?
Yes, so I'm chartered accountant as well, and came into Power Platform via that route. So yeah, really interesting to hear this talk today.
Yep, and Naveen's one of my friends from my network who works for Challenger Bank in the Treasury Department. So much more for kind of finance background as well, and also quite interested in some data science and Python and things like that. So Naveen and I also kind of run another website called learndatainsights.com, which is focusing now on helping people prepare for the DA100. So I do a lot of quizzes, which is why I love these justice quizzes in Denmark. So I've written over 400 or 500 kind of quiz questions, and we've had it's only been kind of launched it properly a couple of months ago. We've had 10,000 quiz attempts, so it's lots of data and lots of really interesting insights to see how that's going. So just a little bit about what's new on the platform. So I don't know if you've been on it recently, Chris. I actually revamped the website a little bit and made it a bit cleaner. Yeah. So because it was getting a bit of a nightmare to update it after every event and then try and get all the spacing and alignment. So I've done it in kind of dynamic content way, which is much easier to work with now. So hopefully that looks a bit cleaner. So we've got recording from the last webinar, which was our Chris's and I colleague Sam Waldadesta, who was presenting on, that's supposed to say a commentary app for the Power Platform, not a expensive solution. It was a commentary app, and I've put a tiny URL link to the recording there. Obviously, if you go onto powerplatformfinance.com, you can also access it there. And we've got all the other 7 webinars as well on there, recordings of those. What I do after each session is go in and do the editing of the recording. So I add annotations and things like that to make the learning experience a bit easier. So you're not just having to kind of continuously listen to people. You can also, have that with reading as well in it. It helps to enhance that learning. I've also got some tips and tricks sessions that I put on. I presented for London Business Analytics Group, which Chris was running at the time, for tips and tricks for working with finance data in Power BI. So it's really based on that example that I showed last year, which was around that doing the income statements in Power BI. So quick link as well to, if you could please provide some feedback on this session. So tinyurl.com PPF feedback. It is case sensitive as well, so please have that over there, and I'll put a link in the chat. So these feedbacks really help us to kind of pick the sessions, and also feedback for the presenters. And we've also got last question on there, which is around a little focus group or user group that we've set up in Teams. So again, if there's places that you want to talk about some of these things, if you're facing some issues implementing some of the stuff in Power BI, and where we've had vendors come and present, so we've had Actoris, PowerOn, and ValQ. They're also in some private channels on those teams teams. So again, if you're trying out some of their solutions or want to understand a bit more about it, then you could reach out directly to them using that channel. So next, in 2 weeks' time, we'll have Chris Hamil from the Power BI CAT team. So he actually works in the Power BI product team, and he used to work in finance in Microsoft. And then he built the visualizations in Power BI as part of his finance role. and they took him over into the Power BI team because he was that good. And I've seen what he's built, and it's amazing. He's done a few blogs and videos recently. Have you seen any of them, Belinda or Chris or anyone else on the call?
I haven't, but I'm interested. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's done some live streams recently, and I think his blog's called Alluring BI. I think I've got that right, alluringbi.com. So he puts out performance tips and tricks, and data design. So a lot of this stuff, he works closely with Miguel from the CAT team as well. And his background is as an accountant and finance. So I saw he posted that on Twitter. I hadn't realized that, so I reached out to him and said, "Hey, you're from a finance background. Do you wanna come and present on the Power Platform Finance Group?" He said yes. So I'll get some more details and then of exactly what he's going to present. So I need to get an abstract still, and then as soon as I've got that, I'll put it up to register on Eventbrite like we have with all the other sessions. So watch this space. I will send out a mail shot as well once that's up and available to register for. And now hand over to Belinda. So Belinda's an MVP as well, but and she's, like me, she's an author of 2 books. Huge amount of experience and wealth, and that's clearly evident by the level of interest that this webinar has received. And I'll let Belinda introduce herself, and over to you, Belinda.
Okay, great. Thanks. Let me go ahead and share my screen.
Right.
And so let me get the slides started. I put in the deck or in the slide or in the chat a URL to get the slide deck, because I do have my finished product in there. So let's go ahead and get started. I don't have a lot of slides. So this is me. I'm Belinda Allen. I am, as Rishi said, I'm a data platform Power BI MVP as well. I've been an MVP, just starting my 9th year. Prior to that, because Power BI hasn't only been around for 5 years, I was a Dynamics MVP, a BizApps MVP. So with the GP product specifically, but ERP is something I've been working on for 20 plus years. And so my Twitter there, some of my information's right there on the slide. This is our agenda for today, and it's very, very simple. I have a brief introduction on cash flows, thoughts, and a few notes, and then heavy on the demos, and my end results are in the slide deck. So if you download the slides, you can get a copy of the end results. Again, here's the bit.ly. I'll show it at the end as well. As with the tiny URL, it is case sensitive. So. All right, so let's dive right into the nitty gritty. I'm going to start by stepping everyone back. Everyone knows this or should know this. A rule of business 101, profits does not equal cash flow. And you could be profitable and not have any cash, and your business could go bankrupt, even though you're profitable. Cash is key. You cannot run a business without cash. So you could be unprofitable, you could be at a giant loss and still have good cash flow. A lot of people say, this is a quote I've seen before, that profits are opinion, cash is fact. So we're going to focus just on the cash and accounting system and some of the ways that we can look at the cash inside of Power BI to make us or allow us to run our business a little bit better. Now, this is the directions for the traditional cash flow statement, and we are so not going to do this now because this whole explanation is as clear as mud, right? Very, very complex. And this format was established a long time ago, before it was very easy for us to get in and look at the nitty-gritty of what's going on in the cash. When this was created, people had to just, pry through paper and paper and paper to find out what was going on in cash. And it wasn't very easy to create an interactive experience to allow us to just get a quick snapshot as to what the heck is going on. So we need to think about what cash flows are meant to reveal. And first of all, we want to know where the cash is coming from. Is it revenue? Is it loans? Is it stock sales? And then we want to know where the cash is being spent, where the money's going to. And then finally, we want to look at our cash balance over an extended period of time. Most of the time, that's multiple years if you compare it to the traditional cash flow statement. But my suggestion to you is let's also get a little more granular in that, look at it over the course of a couple of fiscal periods or a couple of weeks, or even within a single week over several days. Basically, we want to know, is our business thriving, or are we poor on cash flow? So this is what we're going to do. Now, this is one of my favorite slides of all my slides anywhere. I'm aging myself here, but when I was in junior high school, this was the shoe that everybody had to have. It was the Nike shoe. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Nike. And if you would ask me then, I would have said, oh, they've got to be one of the most wealthy companies in the world, let alone in the United States. But a couple of years ago, I read the book called Shoe Dog by the Nike founder, Phil Knight, which, by the way, it's a great book. I totally recommend it. It was enjoyable to me from almost even a fiction point of view. It was that kind of enjoyable as opposed to being a business book. But it was really insightful because at the time this shoe was so popular, they were struggling with cash so badly that they almost went belly up multiple times. So it was interesting that the perception of the consumer was so different than the business itself. Now, before we get into our demos, this is the last slide before we start building things out. I want to talk about two different dates in our financial system. So I'm going to assume most of you have a financial background. So we won't be talking so much about explanation of things, except for this. And with every transaction in a financial system, there are two dates. The first date is the date we want it to appear on the financial statement. So if I'm keying something in and I want it to be on my, let's see, this is August, I want it to be on my September financial, I'm going to date it in September. But there's also an entry date or an actual posting date or whatever you want to call it. And that date is important when we're talking about monitoring our cash flow. So we have two different kinds of dates that we can work with, and we should work with when we're using cash flow. When you're building a profit and loss statement and you're building a balance sheet, the entry date or the date posted or the whatever you want to call it, that date's not important. Only the transaction date, only the reporting date. But when it comes to monitoring cash flow, I'm going to get on my soapbox and say we need to look at both dates. And we'll talk about why as we get into it. So let's go ahead and move into our demo. Forgive me for looking over to the side. That's where my my slide deck is. So, oh, and you know what? I did not open up my financials report. So let me do that really fast. That was not very smart of me. Let's open up the Power BI report. I have a foundation of a report already built and I've connected to data. And this data that I've connected to happens to come from GP, but it doesn't really matter where it comes from. I just use GP a lot because I am so familiar with GP. And of course, I opened up the completed one and not the other one. We don't want to give you a hint as to what it's going to look like just yet. Here we go. Okay, so I have this report all set up for us where I've already connected to my data. So let's go and take a look at the data here. I've got a little star schema thing going. I have my general ledger account transactions that I'm pulling in. In there, I can also tell what vendor or what customer it came from. That's part of my general ledger. I have my chart of accounts over here on the left, where I can connect and get access to certain pieces of information. We're not going to be using the transaction series or projects, but we will be using dates. So we'll be using these three queries right here. This is a date table that I created in DAX. My slide deck does include the DAX code, so if you want to use that. And just so you know, I have that date selected or connected to the reporting date, not the actual date it was entered in. So I'm going to point that out now, because if I use anything from this date, then it's not going, I can't use this actual posting date here. I could create, by the way, I could create an inactive relationship and then use DAX to call on it if I want to, but I just didn't do that in this particular scenario. Okay, we're going to create 4 separate reports using our data. And the first report is we're going to build out the cash, just a simple cash analysis that what we're looking for. When I said looking for it over a long period of time, that's what we're going to do right now. So what I'm going to do, I just have a background on there to make it stand out a little better. I have a title, and I put a little square box here for my data filters, so I know I have all my data filters over here, and then another little text box. That's all I've done so far. Okay, so I'm going to come over on the visualization. I'm going to grab a line chart, and this is what we're going to be using, and I'm going to start populating it. So first of all, in the values, I'm going to go to my account transactions, and one of the things I'm going to point out, let me shrink that up a little bit, is I have what I call net debit, and I have what I call net credit. And what these are is, one is the debit amounts minus the credit amounts, and the other is credit minus debits. And I utilize these a lot. That way, if I'm evaluating sales, for example, and I use credit net, the sales amount will be positive if it has a credit balance. So I use these a lot when I'm developing things. I also have debit and credit amount, so I could go and look at the actual individual line item transaction and see if it was a debit or a credit. So these are the things that I'm using. All right, so in my value, I'm going to go in, I'm looking at cash. I'm going to grab that debit net, because it should be a debit balance. And I'm going to populate that with my line over here. And let me cheat and pull up my ending solution over here on the left, so I know exactly what I'm looking at. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is, this time I'm going to come in, I'm just going to use maybe the actual date this time, because maybe I want to see what date the is being, maybe I want to just look at the year, right? I want to be able to see a year at a time or nothing at all. So I'm going to come and grab the actual date so I could see when it was entered in the system, and I'm going to put that in the axis. Now, the reason why I use this a lot, when it was entered in the system, is because if I'm monitoring my cash flow every single day, I want to know why it changed since yesterday. And if I look at the reporting date, that's not going to tell me anything, because if I today enter in checks from, I'm doing a AP, accounts payable run, and I process checks. Oh, and my apologies, everyone, for using US formatting and US dates. I'm usually put in an apology slide for that when I'm dealing internationally, but okay, so if I'm looking at transactions every single day, and yesterday, let's say, after I looked at statements, I did an accounts payable run, and I posted the checks maybe next Monday, which may happen to fall in September. And I noticed that the cash amount, if I look at the cash balance right now, it's changed. And I'm like, why did that change? I don't see any transactions. That's because I'm not looking in September. Or maybe I backdated something. Well, I don't see that in what's happened today. So that's why I like to look at what has gone on since the last time I looked at it. Okay, so I just want to, I'm going to change this so that I'm not looking at a hierarchy. I'm looking at the actual date. And then let's put in a filter over here. So I'm going to put in a slicer. Whoop, didn't mean to do that. Got to remember to click off your slide. There we go. Now let's input a slicer, and I'm going to just drag this over like so, and then put the posting date in there. This time I'm going to get the date hierarchy, and I'm just going to get the year. Okay, so now I have the year. Now I'm looking at everything right now, so what I'm going to do is go through, and that shows me my account transactions are in balance, so that's a good thing. I'm going to go through and I'm going to put a category in for this whole page so that I'm just looking at accounts that are categorized as cash. And now I can see my cash balance, and I could see it across the year, what changes have occurred. And if I go into a particular year, I could see what's happened across months. And if I wanted to, I can continue to add filters in here so that I could look at it a little more granularly, or however I want to look at it. But what I'd like to do right now, I'm going to switch to 2023, is show you a couple things that you could also do. So this is kind of like the lifeblood of our system. It's the heartbeat, it's the EKG of our system, because we have to know what's going on with cash, and this is guiding us. Now you might want to look at a specific account or have all your accounts listed like this on top of each other so that you could do things. But let's take a look as to what's going on with our cash. Overall, it looks like we're staying on, the trend is we're staying even. We're not making any real progress, but nor are we going down. So let's go ahead and highlight this visual. And then we're going to come over here in the visualization pane and click on analytics. And the first thing I want to do is add a trend line. So I'm just going to open up trend line and click on add. And now that I'm looking at this, I thought we were maintaining the same thing. But if you notice the black dotted trend line, we are on a decline, which tells me that eventually we're going to not be able to be in business anymore. We're going to be operating with no cash at all. So that's a pretty cool way to be able to look at some things. Also, there's a forecast option here in the analytics. And if you add a forecast cash option, I'm going to change this to, let's see, I think I'm looking at my notes so that I could get it just right. Let's see, I want 1 year. So I'm going to change this to 1 year. And from points, I'll go to years. I'm going to ignore no past years and then go ahead and apply that. And now the forecast overwrites the trend line, but I can see what the forecast was for the next year from 2023. So I see the trend line for 2023 because that's what I'm looking at, but this is my forecast for 2024. So I get a better idea of what's going on with my cash as I'm looking at it. And then as I click in here at any given point, I could actually see what really occurred. So definitely the forecast was pretty spot on accurate. So if you don't have dips like this, then it's going to be a little smaller amount of a forecast. So that's how we could look at our first report. And this is a great way to look at cash over a long period of time. I'm not a huge fan of the line chart personally, unless you're using it to look at something over a period of time. If you're looking at it over the course of a year, I find it to be particularly fascinating because you could really tell what the heck is going on. It's much easier to see than a whole bunch of columns. Let's move on to the cash calendar. So I'm actually going to make a calendar that shows me what's going on with cash. This time I'm going to use the reporting date because I want to see what my cashes look like each and every time. And again, you could use the actual date if you want to, but I'm going to use some of the functions that I've created, some of the columns I've created in my date table to allow me to do that. So the first thing I want to do, I want this to be cash only. So I'm going to go ahead and just save myself a little bit of time here and grab that account category and put that filter on this page. So let me do that. I'm not going to do that for everyone, otherwise I would do it on the report. I know some of you are probably thinking that. All right, so I'm going to go in and get a custom visual. So I'm going to click on this ellipsis on the visualizations and get more visuals, and then choose get more visuals again. And then now that app source comes up, I'm going to look for a calendar. I have one I like a lot. And press return. This Beyond Soft, and I've got it in the slide deck too, so you don't have to write that down if you're interested in it after the fact. This is one of my favorite ones. So I'm going to go ahead and click on add. And now that I've done that, I'm going to add this visual to the slide. And so we're going to start populating. It's actually going to give me something that looks just like a calendar. So over here in the fields, I need to put in a date field. So I'm going to come down to my date table and put in the date from my date table. And I did set this as the official date table and this date as the official date field in my data view. And if you guys don't know what I mean by that, then ask the question in the Q&A time and I'll show you where I've done that. And then now we need to measure our data. So the data we want to measure, the cash accounts have a debit balance. So I'm going to take this debit net and drag it into the data measure. And now I can see some of the fields are populating. Now those are really hard to see. So let's go into formatting, go to text, and I'm going to increase my text size. What did I want to increase it to? 18. That'll make it easier to see. And 18 again. All right, and that looks good. And let's see. I'm going to go ahead and turn that title off because I've got the name up at the top. All right. Now, normally I would say that looks good, but it could tell us a lot more than that. We could do some conditional formatting here that's going to help us out a lot, because this is showing us how our cash changed every single day. So what I'm going to do in this one is still under formatting on this visual. I'm going to go open up the data colors, and I'm going to, I'm going to, under the type gradient, I'm going to turn on diverging. So now I could set my minimum color as light red, don't go too dark. And I am someone who's in favor of putting in a background or an icon and not changing text colors. I find red text very difficult to read, and it doesn't stand out to me. If that was its intention, putting the background red or putting a little red flag, that stands out to me. The center color, I'll put light yellow, and then the green, I'm just going to go and grab something light. Doesn't matter what it is. That is a little too wow in your face, but you know what? We'll live with it. All right, so now let's put in a filter. So let me click off of everything. I'm going to add in a slicer. And in this slicer, I'm going to go to my date table, and I have added in on my date table. Well, no, I didn't. So let me add that in real fast. I've got in year and quarter. So what I'm going to do is quickly add in a year and fiscal period. We'll call it year and month. We're going to assume this is a calendar company. Their fiscal year is a calendar year. And I want it to be 4 years, or 4 digits for the year and 2 digits for the month. And the reason why I want that is that way when I sort, it will sort, whoops, what did I miss? Format date. Oh, ending. All right. And let's see, that looks good. Let's save that. I now have that new column. So I'm going to go and grab year and month and drag it into my slicer. And again, when it sorts, oh, I thought I did that. Guess I didn't. Let's try it again. We'll drag it right there. Oh, that's funny. Doesn't take much to entertain me, obviously, does it? I added 1 extra Y in there. Okay. Now, when I sort, I'm going to sort descending. The January will come before, or December will come before, well, I guess the better example would be, yeah, December will come before January, right? So the 1 will fall in the correct place. All right, so let me come in and select a particular month. So now you can see this gradient of colors changing between what days I had better cash flow coming in and what days I had cash flow going out. And if I were looking at this, if this was a customer site, and I have freaked out a couple of customers by pointing out to them, I know what days their AP runs are, their payroll runs, because I could see it looks like they did a big on the net on this day that's probably when AP was run. So what you might want to do on custom visuals, drill down reports don't really work very well, but you might want to then, you know, hey, I need to investigate what the heck is going on the 21st. Or you might want to put the balance, the bank balance on there instead of the net change. Personally, I like the net change, but you could do that as well. Okay, now that we've got that, that's, I think, a really cool report to look at. But now we're going to look at the cash in and out. And let me switch over to that one here so I remember what I want to show. This is one I created over 20 years ago in Excel. And I created this, and it took a lot of manual work at first because I worked with my husband. We implemented Dynamics GP. And for years, he kept saying to me, where does the money go? Where does the money go? Where does the money go? So I said, you know what, I'm going to build him a report and show him where the money goes. And this is where I really started thinking about using the date you enter a transaction in instead of just any other date. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to start by entering a custom bar chart. And I'm going to just shrink it up so it only takes up half the page. Okay. And on this bar chart, on the values, I'm going to, on one side, I'm going to have the money coming in, and the other side, I'm going to have the money going out. So on here, I'm going to come in and grab not the net debit. I'm going to grab everything that just the pure debit amounts, all the transactions that created debit amounts. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm looking at the cash accounts, and I'm saying, this is everything that had a debit or increased the account, and this is everything that had a credit that decreased the account. Now you can see, and I'm doing this by the date the transaction was entered and not anything else. So let's come over here really fast, and I'm going to just cheat because I think here I used my, on this filter, on this slicer, I used actual date. So I'm going to come back over to cash change, and I'm going to put in that date, the account transaction date. So now when I look at it, if I look at a particular year, I can see the account transaction date. So what I also want to do then on the slicer, I'm going to come over here to the fields again. On the axis, I'm going to grab, let's say, the period ID and put that in the axis. So now, whoops, period ID. So now I can see the period ID. Or actually, one of the things that might be better is if I take the actual period and put in here, and let me get rid of year, quarter, and month. So now I can see the month. That's actually better than what I had before. Okay, so I have all of the month transactions that have occurred for whatever year I have selected here. Now, a couple things about this. Okay, first of all, I want to make sure I'm only looking at cash again. So I'm going to put my cash category in filter on this page and select cash. And now I'm just looking at my cash transactions for that particular year. All right, so that looks good. And I think that's all I want to do right now. Okay, very good. Let me also actually come in on the transaction date in this slicer. Let me come back in and put this year in again. And this time, let me go to the hierarchy, get rid of that one. I want to get rid of quarter, and I want to get rid of, oh, actually, I want to keep quarter. So let me go to date hierarchy. Let me just get rid of day. So now I have this hierarchy level. So if I select the year 2021, or 2024, or 2023, that's a good one. I could open it up and I could select or multi-select whatever quarters I want. So I'm just going to get quarter number 3, or I could multi-select if I want. So I could see what happened in a full quarter based on the days it was entered. And you could actually key in a whole date range too if you wanted to. I'm going to switch it and put that in just a moment. But now that I have this done, I have the cash in and cash out. I wanted to show you the months here. I'm going to go ahead and close that, get rid of the months, because what I really want to put in here is where the money came from. So this is actually showing me, if I look, hover over each one, I could see the ID of the master record and the name. So this came from customers, Vancouver Resort Hotels. So I could see. And it's for whatever period I have entered in here, I could see what money came in. This is where the money came from. So let me just change this name real fast on here to inflows. And because I'm a little bit of a freak, we'll center that. All right, so that's my inflow. Copy, paste that whole visual. And then guess what? Now let's make this one outflows. I'm going to change the color red so I don't even have to think about which one that is. So the axis is red. Now let me come in. I've got a debit amount here. I want to replace that with a credit amount. So now I'm looking at where the money went. Now just to wrap this up, I'm going to clear this filter. And I'm going to change this filter. Let me change, first of all, this to the actual date. And then I'm going to change this to a slider. And now you can put in a date range here for when things actually occurred. And you could control the dates. Now, one of the things that I like to do, I've got this filter on this actual posting date. I like to come in and change this from basic to relative date. And then you could put in like the last 30 days. And then you could control the days you want to see using this particular filter. So you could put in the last 30 days or however often you want. I'm going to change my filter to last 4 years because this is sample data and it's really junky. So now, once you put this in though and set this relative date for the last 30 days, you're always only looking at the last 30 days here. And then you have control over filters here. So you can filter that any way you want. But this is money coming in or all the debit entries and money going out. Now, true that if you just manually make an entry to the cash in your general ledger, it's going to appear here. And that's perfectly okay. So I have no problem with that because it is what is changing our cash. And that's what we're looking for. Where did the money come from? Remember, that's one of the things we wanted to know with our statement and where the money went out to. This is the other thing that the cash flow statements meant. And then, of course, you could always right mouse click on one of these and you can choose to put some drill down data in here. So you can create a drill down report and do certain things if you wanted to as well. All right, and let's see. Now on to the last report statement. I want to do here. I showed this to someone. I thought this was my way of looking at financial statements overall, all of it, balance sheet, profit and loss, cash flow, all together as visual, because I've had this ever since Power BI's come out. I've talked with a couple of different friends of mine in who do a lot of reporting and financial reporting particularly, and I'm like, well, how would we envision changing the way we see the financial statement? And so this was something that I came up with, and when I showed it to someone when I was presenting on visual financial statements, I saw two people, talking about it in the room. They were obviously talking about it. So I asked them to share with me what they were talking about. And she's like, that's probably the closest thing I've ever seen to a real cash flow statement. And I thought, oh, that's pretty exciting. So I'm going to show you this. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to cheat. On this one, we're going to use the actual date, the reporting date, not the actual date. So I'm going to just cheat and copy this slicer. You guys know how to do a slicer, so I'm not going to show it to you from there. Let me just unselect a date. All right, I'm going to create 6 visuals, and they're all going to be pretty much the same thing. So I'm going to create the first one and then copy and paste. So we'll create it big, and then I'll shrink it up, and then we'll do a little bit of cleanup. So this is our report. Let me come over and select. Oops, went too far. Okay. So what we're going to do, this is a clustered bar, a bar chart, or you could just use a stack bar chart. Doesn't really matter because we're only going to use the axis and we're only going to use the value. So in the value here, I'm going to go and grab net debit because what I'm going to look at is my cash balance. And so in the axis, I'm going to put in the, let me go to date and put in the month in the axis. Okay, so now let me go to a particular month. Oh, I got to select multiple months. That's right. You know what? We'll just clear that for now. Okay. I don't know why. Oh, I know why, because I'm still looking at everything. Okay, so now what I want to do is just look at cash. So I'm going to come in, when you're presenting in front of someone, all of a sudden you start freaking out. So much of this is second nature, and then all of a sudden you're like, what am I doing? Okay, I'm going to put a count category on this filter only, and it's going to be cash. This is why I didn't apply it to the whole report, because I just want to look at the cash. And so now if I come in and look at these, why don't I have, let's see, let's come and look at our fields again. I have net debit. Let me take off month. Net debit. Oh, let me clear the filter again. Sorry about that. Let's put this back in. debit net under value, and then let me get the months. Put them in the access. I don't know why that's just showing me January, but that's okay. You know what? Let's do this. Let's put the year and the month in. There we go. Very interesting. Okay, so I've got just my, I don't have my cash in there. Okay, category cash. Oh, that was why. Hello, Belinda. I put my filter on my slicer, didn't I? Yep, that was pretty stupid. Okay, much better. Took me a second there. Okay, so now this is my representing what went on with my cash for this period that I've selected, these 3 months. And it happens to be negative, but that's okay. So I'm going to take this. Well, first let me come in and format the title. So I'm going to call this cash change because I only want the net amount. So let me center that and make the font just a tad bigger. Okay, so I only want the net amount. I'm going to come in and shrink this up to where I think I could have room for 6 more, 5 more. Let me also, while I'm thinking about it, I want to get rid of period 0 off this report. In this particular data set, beginning balances have a period 0. So you might want to think about how you want your beginning balances to appear. But I'm only interested in how my cash changed over these months. And in these months, my cash went down. Okay, so I'm going to select this visual, copy and paste it 2 more times, and then stretch these out. And then I'm going to select all 3, go to Format, align them horizontally, align them to the top, Control-C, Control-V. And now I have 6 different visuals that explain what's going on. Now, right now they're all cash, so we need to make a few changes. On this one, I want to make this one accounts receivable. So with this visual selected, I'm going to change my category from cash to accounts receivable, still net debit, because that would be a debit balance. And then I'm going to, doesn't look like I had any change in accounts receivable for that period. And then I'm going to come into the title and change that to AR. Now for this one, I want to look at cash. So I'm going to change our sales. So I'm going to change this from cash to this one to sales. And then a couple things here. First of all, I want to put in sales. And then, oh, I think I might have had my filter wrong. And then let me change this one to, let's see, I did that to sales. Oh, let me come in, debit net, credit net. We want that to be a credit balance. So we should be looking at credit. Let me clear that filter for a moment. All right, that's good enough for now. Okay, so we've got cash, AR, and sales. When you're looking at bad data where there's no transactions, it's a little hard to do comparisons. All right, so now we have our, we have our cash change, our AR change, and our sales change. Over here, we want to make this one the, let's make this one, let me skip over to here for a moment. Let me make this one accounts payable change. Method to my madness. So I'm going to clear the cash filter here, and I'm going to make this accounts payable. So we're just looking at accounts payable. That should also have a credit value, not a debit value. And then let me just change the title. And then here, instead of cash, let me look at, I'm going to assume this is a distribution company. So I'm going to look at inventory and cost of goods sold, because it's possible for whatever period I'm looking at, I bought inventory and sold it in the same period. So if I look at both of those, I'm getting the net of all the inventory I bought are all the items I've bought for that particular period. So I'm going to change this filter from cash to inventory and cost of goods sold. And I'm going to change the name to inventory and COGS. Okay, and then that also should be a net debit, so that looks good. And then on this last one, I'm going to change this one to be my full net profit for that period. So the net profit should be a credit balance if it's really profit. And I'm going to come in here and change the title to net profit. And then here in the category, I'm going to clear it first and then delete it. And then I'm going to come into my account type for this particular filter and select cost of goods sold, expense, and sales. So basically I netted out to get the net profit. Now, why is this something that's valuable? We're going to pretend that we're looking at a 3-month period. All right, so as I look at, especially for period 1 here for 2024, as I look at my cash went up. My AR went up. So I must have sold a lot. And as you could see, I did, because the fact that I sold so much, and I might want to look at the numbers here. So I sold 1.7, my AR went up 500. So that tells me that I probably collected a good bit. I probably collected more than $700,000, and my cash went up, what is that, 400, 300, almost 400,000. That means I spent some. So I had to spend at least more than 300,000. So if I come and look at my expenses, I could see this particular expense. And if you're not a distribution, maybe if you're a professional services, you look at inventory or payroll here, and then net profit, or you just look at all your expenses. I could see, oh, there it is. I spent almost $500,000, so that makes sense. But my AR also increased $600,000. So what happened? Where is this money? If you look at these side by side and compare how they're changing, you could figure out a few things. So if I look at my cash went up, my sales went up, my AR went up, and my AP went up. So did they go up in conjunction with each other? So, and the reason why I started doing this is I was working with a customer who they had, this was so many years ago, they had moved their company across the state line, and they started over with a new corporation. And then they got audited for the older corporation. And that company, they had taken that database, I don't know why they did this, off their system, and their backups, they weren't backing it up anymore. So we had to go and recreate all their data, and we showed they had this giant loss. And the owner kept saying, how could I have that loss? Look at everything I have. And it cost me, I forgot how much it was, $800,000 to build this building and do all this. And we're like, yes, but look at your accounts payable. You owe over $1 million. You don't own any of this, right? So this is what made me think about this kind of statement. So I love being able to do this. I'm going to jump back to my slide deck for a moment. And that kind of wraps up that part of the presentation. So let's go to the slides. I want to jump back to where I did the forecasting line and the trend line. There are some limitations on that. And the line chart is the only chart or the only visual where you could do forecasting. The trend line, obviously you have to have data, time data in there, and it shows you what charts you could do those on, and the only ones. And then also I have a deck where you can get to the docs to get a little bit more information on that. I do have an image of the visual that I use for my calendar. I also have a copy of my DAX table, and oddly enough, for some reason in my slide deck, I have that year and that month in here, so if you want to do that. And then I have a picture of each of the slides that we created today and how they could work together with each one of those. And then here again is the slide deck. So here's my contact information. Were there any kind of questions that anybody had?
Thank you for that, Belinda. Excellent presentation and really interesting to see how you go about it. Having come from a finance background, it's excellent to see. There was a question right near the beginning. You showed the book on the shoes, and what was the name of the book? People were looking for it.
Oh,
elaborate.
it's called Shoe Dog.
Shoe Dog. Okay, I will put that in the chat. Okay, yeah, I'll dig it out.
Yes. Yeah, Shoe Dog by, let me see if I can find it really fast. It really is. It was one of the best books I read that year. Let's see. Shoe Dog. And oh, it looks like they're going to do a movie. Hot dog. Okay. It's quite fascinating book. It's almost as much, forgive me for giving it to you in Amazon format, but I'll put it in the slide deck there. It's almost a book that's a autobiography as it is anything else, but it also allows the QR code again. Yes. Actually, I'll just put the link in. It's more a book, autobiography than a business book, but for business people, that's often the same thing. So thank you so much. Ooh, that was really big I put in there. I don't know why it went so big. Sorry, that bit.ly in there is so big, but you can click on the bit.ly in the chat. Yeah, the calendar is a really great view. It's a great way to look at your cash. I would probably recommend looking at the net change, though, on the day it was entered in, because one of the things that you could probably do is if you start with that, you can really tell, hey, what days do I really want to pay attention to? What do I want to see? So that's something that could be super beneficial. Would it be possible to share the final PBIX file? Yes, it would be. Give me 2 seconds here. And we will create a new, I will upload it. And at all, you can just find the location of that. So you could have all of that work, absolutely. Okay, cool.
Could you go back to the analytics pane and just show where you showed the forecast?
Absolutely, absolutely. So let me go in and share again. Oh, that's not the right thing. When you have so many pages open. Okay, here we go. Let's see. Let's find it. Screen 2. Okay. So here we are. That was on the line chart. Okay, so right here, I'm going to select this visual, this line chart visual. And in the visualization pane, let me collapse the other two so it's a little easier to focus on what we're looking at. Okay, so in the visualization pane over here, we have our fields option where we can control the fields that are being used within this visual. We have format where we can format what's going on. And then we have the analytics option. So I'm assuming this is the one that you wanted to see. So in here, there's a lot of things that you could add. One of the things that I did when I was looking or we were playing around with the coronavirus reports, I downloaded Microsoft coronavirus report, and because they were using the same connection information that I was using in mine, but they also had population. And I thought this would be really interesting because I wanted to compare how the virus was doing in the county I lived in compared to the county my mother-in-law lived in, compared to the county my granddaughter lived in, so that we could figure out how safe it would be to do visits. And so in doing that, I created a line chart of new cases, very similar to this particular concept. And then what I did was I put for each one, actually I created one line chart and I have all 3 counties in there. And so I could see all 3 lines, but I gave each one of them a separate trend line. Let me do that now so I could show it to you. So I've got this selected. I'm gonna come in here and let me add in, let's see, I've got net debit. Let me also add in, this will make no sense from a financial perspective, but I'm going to take, oh, you know what I could do? Get rid of net debit. I'm going to put in my sales numbers and my cost of goods sold numbers. And these do not work with the with this date here, I don't think. So I'm going to have to clear this filter. Okay, and oh, hello. Let's come back again. Okay, get rid of this actual date here and then put in the date down here. I should be able to get that. What filter do I have in place? Get rid of cash. Okay. Oh, that was why it wasn't showing up. Okay. All right. Let me put in a date here, a date range. I don't even know how I want to do that. Okay, let me come in here. Let's see if I could select it this way. 2027. Okay, that one's good. All right, so I have all three of these. Let me narrow it down because that is really, let me get July, January, and, oh, I have the filters over here. Oh, okay. Hello. Let me, anyhow, I could show it like this. It just won't be super fascinating. All right, so I've got my line chart here. And if I go under analytics, what I did was on the trend line, I only added one trend line, but what I did on, instead of combined series, I said, I turned that off. And so now if I were to come in here and, you know what I could do? I could come in and change this slicer so that I'm looking at sorry, I get so sidetracked. Okay, so let me come in and open up Q. There we go. Now you can see the individual trend lines that represent the fields that I have. So that's a really cool way of doing it too, is that you don't have to add two trend lines. You just go in and turn off the combined. I hope that answers a little more of the questions that you had on that. Were there any other questions or comments or go back tos?
I think that was it. I mean, I'd be interested to have a quick look at the measures that you've got there, actually. I think if you could see
okay.
kind of net debit, net credits, and just see how they.
Yeah, this is something I do a lot. So let's start with I've hidden all the actual numbers and I'm only using measures for my numbers. I try to do that a lot because if you choose, when you upload this to analyze in Excel, it only uses measures as real numbers. If you have it like the debit amount from your original source and you try to do the analyze in Excel, it thinks of the number as like a text field. So, and it's trying to create something, it gives you the option to create a pivot table, but if the numbers are using like a text field and you can't change them in any way, then it's no good to you. So I try to create a measure for everything. So this is just a sum of all my debt. When it's debit or credit, it's just the sum of all of those. So if I open up net debit now, what I'm doing is, and I guess this was a bad example. Let me open up net credit. I think I did it a little differently. Yep, I did. So now I'm saying, take the sum of my credit amount minus the sum of my debit amount. Or I could have just did the calculation where I'm saying, get the measure debit minus the measure credit. So this is a part of a training system. So that's another way that you could do that. Then another thing that I did, because I wanted to be able to get just an asset number, for example, is I'm using a command here that allows me to say, okay, assets, this measure is calculating the net debit when the chart of accounts is set to asset. And so this is how I'm creating all these individual fields. And the reason why I'm doing this is it enables me to, if I took this particular chart and I took off the sales and the cost of goods sold, I could come in and say, all right, show me, well, basically that was what I just did was what I should have just kept out there. Let me see if I can delete that. That's basically a financial statement right there for whatever period. Because I'm looking at sales, cost of goods sold, and expenses. It just doesn't look, oh, I didn't add the expenses.
Yeah.
It looks so weird.
Well,
there we go.
If you were to present a traditional kind of financial statement,
Mm-hmm.
and then you just had account category on your axes or your rows,
Mm-hmm.
how would you then be able, rather than having to kind of create specific measures to say this sales is a credit, assets a debit on the balance sheet? So I suppose how would you have to do it that way? Because I mean the way I've seen it done before is just using kind of a sign, right? So positive and negative.
Right, and you could definitely do that. Typically what I do is, because I break out the sum of the credits and the sum of the debits separately, and then I do these net amounts, and that's typically how I do it. Now, the reason for that is because if I'm looking at cash, I don't want to have to, instead of trying to say, when I'm looking at sales is a better example. Let me go to sales. When I'm looking at my sales, instead of, let me come in here and bring this out a little bit so it's a little easier to see. Okay, instead, and by the way, I did a shift return if some of you guys don't know how to do that. Okay, so instead of trying to figure out for sales that it needs to be a credit balance, so I'm going to do a negative, I actually just create a measure that does the negative for me. So when I use credit net, it's calculating that for me. Now, I always say model your data and for the most technologically challenged person in the company. In other words, the dumbest person in the company, right? Because then if you could build it for them, then, and since I'm a grandma, I use the term grandma because some grandmas are very not technical at all. And so my mother wouldn't know a debit from a credit or anything. So I try to make it where my mother could understand what it is. Chances are she wouldn't use the net credit or net debit, and I probably would hide those anyhow, but the sales she would probably use. And so instead of trying to figure out which one to use, when I am creating a function for just the sales, I have that value listed there. Otherwise, what I would probably do is do something along the lines of, I don't know, in your dimension for your chart of accounts, maybe calculate it accordingly, but I try to break it out, and I break it out into these very generic categories. And these categories that I have are these type categories that you see like right here, where in my chart of accounts, I have it set up with, in this case, there's only 6 generic categories. I have assets, I have liabilities and equity, I have sales, I have cost of goods sold, I have expenses, and then I have unit accounts, which are non-financial accounts. That would count things like employees and so forth. So that way I'm only having to create like 5 of these particular types of categories. So if I use sales as my transaction, because I could still come in and do a lot of really cool things with this. So for example, that's why I always have a blank. Okay, so I'm going to just put in a table here. If I came in and said, all right, I want to put my sales in, so that's my total sales. But now I could come in and go and say, all right, so what are my account numbers that are sales? And so I'm going to say, all right, get the account number, get the account category. And I'm starting to see everything that is bundled under the group sales, because then I don't have to actually even think about it. Now I'm going to drag my sales amount down, because that's the only ones that relate to it. And that's what I find that to be a whole lot easier. I don't know why I've got negative stuff going on, but I find that to be a lot easier. Oh, I must have changed something somewhere. Okay.
Because your sales returns of debit postings essentially.
Oh, this is what I did right here. When I recreated this, I did it backwards. Okay. Credit minus debit. There we go. So now when I look at it, my number should reverse. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what you get for monkeying with your DAX. So that's what I did on creating all these. And so the net profit is just the assets then minus the liability and equity. So that's how I calculate my net profit. And then what I also do is I create an out of balance where I create the profit and loss the other way. So I have sales minus cost of goods sold minus expense. And then I'm backing out the net profit that I created from the balance sheet. And so if that has a balance, then I know something is wrong with my report somewhere. So often I'll come in and just put like a card in and say, all right, let's throw in an out of balance right there. And if that has a value in it, then I have a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense actually. It's good to have some of these data quality checks as well in your reports. Absolutely. Something that's underutilized, I think.
So those are all of my, I don't have that many, as you can see, but I have the debit and the credit because I use those because rather than the original debit and credit, just for being able to export into Excel from the Power BI service. And then I have my net credit and net debit, just so I don't have to remember which formula when to do a minus and when not to. It does the math for me. All I have to do is think about, oh, this is a sales. This has a credit balance. So I'm going to grab the credit net one. And then, so that's something that I always do. I just find that to be a lot easier than trying to recreate the calculation each and every time. And then I have the categories listed here.
Great. Thanks for that, Belinda. That was
sure.
Any other questions before we wrap up? So I know we're a little bit over. Nope, I think that's it. Yeah, I mean, feel free to reach out. Belinda shared the links to download the files. So yeah, do have a look at those. You can see all the measures and everything else in there as well, and all of the visuals that she's shown. And I'll share those along with the recording. So thanks very much again, Belinda. And thanks everyone for joining. And yeah, hopefully we'll have you back for a dynamic session because lots of people said they'd be interested in that actually.
Okay.
So yeah, finance dynamic session would be really good. And maybe if we do one, I think we'll start it probably just end of September or beginning of October.
Okay.
So if you kind of keep one of those dates kind of free around that time, then that'll be great. We'll be in touch on LinkedIn or something, and we'll try to arrange another session to have you back.
That sounds fabulous.
Great. All right. Okay. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Belinda. And look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.